A lonely widow saved a stray cat, never realizing it was the reincarnation of her late husband, though somewhere deep in her heart, in a place beyond logic and reason, Margaret Sullivan felt a flicker of recognition the moment those amber eyes met hers through the driving rain. She stood frozen on her porch, grocery bags clutched against her chest, watching the bedraggled creature huddled beneath her hydrangea bush. 3 years since Daniel's passing, and still the emptiness of returning to this house, their house, struck her with physical force each time she turned the key. Today, something was different. The cat looked up at her, rain streaming from its matted gray fur, and let out a meow that seemed to pierce straight through her carefully constructed walls of solitude. "Go on," Margaret whispered, her voice catching as she unlocked her door. "There's plenty of strays in this neighborhood, Mrs. Patterson 2 doors down leaves food out." But the cat didn't move, just watched her with an unsettling steadiness, as if waiting for her to recognize something important. Margaret hurried inside, shaking raindrops from her silver-streaked brown hair. Through the window, she could see the animal still sitting there, seemingly unconcerned by the worsening storm. Thunder cracked overhead, making her jump. Daniel had always teased her about her fear of thunderstorms, would wrap his arms around her during the worst of them, and whisper jokes in her ear until she laughed instead of trembled. "Stop it," she murmured to herself, unpacking groceries with mechanical efficiency. "Just stop." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cat's silhouette, still watching her house, still waiting. With a sigh that felt dragged from the depths of her, Margaret grabbed a small bowl, filled it with milk, and reluctantly stepped back onto the porch. "Just tonight," she told the cat firmly as she placed the bowl under the porch overhang. "Don't get any ideas." The cat approached cautiously, limping slightly on what appeared to be an injured paw. As it began to drink, Margaret noticed a peculiar marking on its chest, a splash of white fur in an almost perfect crescent shape. Daniel had had a birthmark like that, a pale crescent on his shoulder. The coincidence sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the rain. For a moment, she stood transfixed, watching the cat, until another thunderclap startled her back to reality. "Good night," she said abruptly, retreating inside and firmly closing the door. That night, Margaret dreamed of Daniel for the first time in months. Not the hospital Daniel with tubes and monitors and the smell of antiseptic, but her Daniel, laughing as they danced in their kitchen, teasing her about burning yet another batch of cookies, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was truly happy. She woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she'd forgotten to close and the unfamiliar sensation of tears on her cheeks. For a fleeting moment, the dream clung to her, and she reached instinctively for the empty space beside her in bed. The bowl on the porch was empty when she checked, but the cat was gone. Margaret told herself the relief she felt was because she'd dodged the responsibility of a pet, not disappointment. She'd done her good deed. Life would continue as it had for the past 3 years, quiet, organized, and empty. Except the cat returned that evening, sitting primly by her front steps as though waiting for her to come home from her part-time job at the library. This time there was no rain to excuse her actions, as Margaret found herself opening a can of tuna from her pantry. "Don't get comfortable," she warned as she set the food down. The cat merely blinked at her, those amber eyes unnervingly familiar. Days passed in this manner, Margaret providing food but maintaining a careful distance, the cat accepting her offerings with a dignity that seemed almost human. She found herself talking to it sometimes, small comments about her day or observations about the weather, things she might have once shared with Daniel. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you listening?" Margaret startled, blinking rapidly as she refocused on Ellen Lowry's concerned face across the library desk. "I'm so sorry, Ellen," she said, straightening the stack of returned books. "My mind wandered. I was asking if you'd thought about the community garden project. We need volunteers and it would get you out of the house." Ellen's expression held the particular mixture of pity and encouragement that Margaret had come to recognize from well-meaning friends. "I'll think about it," she answered automatically, the same response she'd given to every invitation for the past 3 years. "That's what you always say," Ellen replied softly. "Daniel wouldn't want—" "Please don't tell me what my husband would want," Margaret interrupted, her voice sharper than she'd intended. The momentary hurt on Ellen's face made her regret the outburst immediately. "I'm sorry. I know my own mind." Ellen patted her hand. "Of course you do. The offer stands whenever you're ready." That evening, as Margaret approached her house, she found herself scanning the yard for the gray cat. When she didn't see it, a disproportionate disappointment settled in her chest. She told herself it was for the best. Attachments only led to more pain when they inevitably ended. As she prepared a simple dinner for one, a noise at the back door caught her attention. The cat sat on her back step, watching her through the glass door with that steady, knowing gaze. Without analyzing her actions too deeply, Margaret opened the door. "It's going to rain again," she said, as if that explained her decision. "You can come in just until it passes." The cat entered her home with a familiarity that should have been impossible, immediately making its way to Daniel's old reading chair in the corner of the living room, his chair that she had kept precisely as he left it, that she couldn't bring herself to sit in but couldn't bear to remove. "Not there," she said quickly, moving to shoo the animal away. But as she approached, she noticed the cat's injured paw again, now clearly swollen. "Oh, you're really hurt, aren't you?" The cat merely looked at her, then gingerly licked at its paw. Margaret hesitated only briefly before retrieving her first aid kit. "I'm not sure what's appropriate for cats," she murmured, more to herself than her visitor. "Daniel would know. He grew up with barn cats. Always had a way with animals." She carefully cleaned the injured paw, noting the cat's remarkable patience as she worked. It didn't fight or scratch, just watched her with those intense amber eyes. "You need a name," she found herself saying. "I can't just keep calling you Cat in my head." The cat tilted its head slightly, and Margaret was struck by an absurd notion that it was considering the question. "How about Gray?" she suggested, then immediately shook her head. "No, too obvious. Daniel would laugh at my lack of imagination." A small smile tugged at her lips, the first spontaneous one in longer than she could remember. "He always said I was terrible at naming things. Should have heard his reaction when I wanted to name our first car Car." The cat blinked slowly. "What about Chance?" she offered, "since that's what I'm taking with you." The cat purred, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to fill the quiet corners of the house, chasing away some of the silence that had been Margaret's constant companion. "Chance it is, then," she decided. That night, Margaret allowed Chance to sleep on the couch, providing an old towel as bedding. In the morning, she found him not on the couch, but curled at the foot of her bed, in the exact spot where Daniel used to place his slippers. She should have been annoyed at the invasion, but instead found herself oddly comforted by the presence of another living being in her too quiet house. "Just until your paw heals," she told Chance over breakfast, as she hesitantly placed a saucer of milk on the floor. "Then we'll find you a proper home." But as days turned into weeks, Margaret found herself making no effort to rehome her unexpected companion. Small changes crept into her carefully maintained routine, buying proper cat food at the grocery store, leaving the radio on during the day so he won't be lonely, finding herself hurrying home from the library rather than lingering with busy work as she once did. She began to notice strange coincidences that she tried to dismiss. How Chance seemed to know which mornings she would wake with migraine pain, appearing with concerned attention as she winced in the harsh morning light. How he would sit by the coffee maker and stare at it intently at precisely 7:15 each morning, the exact time Daniel had always prepared their coffee. How he somehow managed to find the one photo album she had hidden away in the hall closet, the one from their honeymoon, and pawed at it until she finally opened it one rainy Sunday afternoon. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself as she flipped through pictures she hadn't looked at in years. "He's a cat, not Daniel." Yet she couldn't deny that something had shifted in her heart. The house no longer felt quite so empty. She caught herself humming as she prepared dinner, noticed flowers in the garden she had neglected for too long, found herself responding to Ellen's invitations with "maybe next time" instead of her usual deflection. Chance's injured paw healed, but neither of them pretended he would be leaving. One evening, as spring bloomed fully outside her windows, Margaret sat in her garden for the first time in years. Chance lounged nearby, watching a butterfly with the focused attention only cats can muster. "Daniel planted these roses," she found herself saying aloud. "He wasn't much of a gardener, killed every houseplant we ever had, but he insisted on these roses for our anniversary." She touched a soft peach-colored bloom. "Said they matched my blush when he proposed." Chance abandoned the butterfly to pad over and press against her leg. The simple weight and warmth of him broke something loose inside her. "I miss him so much," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "Sometimes I still reach for him when I wake up." Sometimes I still buy his favorite cereal at the store before I remember. Chance placed a paw on her knee, his amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a wild, irrational moment, she could have sworn she saw Daniel looking back at her. "This is crazy," she said, wiping her eyes. "I'm talking to a cat like he's my therapist." But that night, for the first time since the funeral, Margaret pulled out Daniel's old record collection and played the Ella Fitzgerald album they had danced to on their wedding day. And when Chance jumped onto the sofa beside her, she didn't push him away but instead stroked his fur as tears and smiles mingled freely on her face. The walls around her heart hadn't exactly crumbled, but windows had definitely opened, letting light and air circulate through rooms long closed off. Spring turned to summer, and Margaret found herself accepting Ellen's invitation to help with the community garden after all. She started small, just one morning a week, but soon found herself volunteering additional days, enjoying the feel of soil between her fingers and the company of others who didn't look at her with quite so much pity anymore. "That cat of yours has been good for you," Ellen observed one day as they planted tomato seedlings. "You seem more present." Margaret smiled, surprised to find the expression coming more naturally now. "He's quite the character. Sometimes I swear he understands every word I say. Animals know things," Ellen said sagely. "My grandmother always said they could see straight into our souls." That evening, Margaret found herself telling Chance about her day as she prepared dinner, a habit that had developed so gradually she hardly noticed it had become routine. "Ellen's grandson is getting married in the fall," she said, chopping vegetables with newfound energy. "She's invited me to attend. I think I might actually go." Chance, sitting on the kitchen counter despite her half-hearted attempts to discourage this behavior, purred loudly. "Daniel and I were married in autumn too," she continued. "The leaves were just starting to turn. He said it was perfect because everything looked golden, just like our future would be." She paused, the knife still in her hand. "We did have a golden life, didn't we? Even with how it ended. We were lucky." The cat stretched out a paw to touch her arm, a gesture so deliberate it sent shivers down her spine. That night, Margaret dreamed of Daniel again. They were walking through their garden, his hand warm in hers. "You're doing well, Maggie," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called her. "I'm trying," she replied. "Some days are harder than others." He stopped beneath the old oak tree where they had once hung a swing. His eyes, amber eyes, she suddenly realized, looking deeply into hers. "I'm still with you, you know. Always will be." "I know," she said in the dream, with a certainty that felt bone deep. "I feel you." When she woke, Chance was curled against her pillow, watching her with those same amber eyes from her dream. Without thinking, she whispered, "Daniel?" The cat blinked slowly, then leaned forward to press his forehead against hers in a gesture so tender and deliberate that Margaret felt her heart stutter. "This is crazy," she whispered, even as she reached out to stroke his fur. "Absolutely crazy." Yet, throughout that day, and the days that followed, she found herself studying Chance more carefully, noting each behavior that triggered memories of Daniel. The way he would sit by the door waiting for her return, just as Daniel had always done, how he seemed to favor Daniel's side of the bed, his peculiar habit of pawing at the crossword puzzle in the Sunday paper, Daniel's weekend ritual. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came the anniversary of Daniel's death. In previous years, Margaret had spent the day alone in her bedroom, curtains drawn, phone unplugged. This year, she found herself rising early, Chance at her heels with a different plan forming. "I think we should visit him today," she told the cat as she dressed. "Would that be too strange?" "I haven't been to the cemetery since the funeral." Chance merely watched her with those knowing eyes. The cemetery was peaceful in the morning light, dew still clinging to the grass as Margaret made her way to Daniel's grave with Chance following dutifully behind, no leash necessary. She had brought fresh flowers, not roses this time, but wildflowers that reminded her of the meadow where they'd had their first picnic. Standing before the headstone, Margaret felt a curious sense of calm rather than the overwhelming grief she had expected. "Hello, my love," she said softly, arranging the flowers in the small vase embedded in the stone. "I've brought someone to meet you, though. Perhaps you already know each other." Chance sat beside her, his posture almost reverent. "I'm doing better," she continued. "I think you'd be proud. I'm even going to Ellen's grandson's wedding next month. Remember how you always loved weddings? How you dance with all the grandmothers and make them blush?" A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and Margaret closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine it was Daniel's touch against her cheek. "I've been thinking about what you said before you left, about how I shouldn't lock my heart away when you were gone." Her voice caught slightly. "I didn't listen very well at first, but I think I'm learning." Chance pressed against her leg, a warm, solid presence. "I've had help," she added, looking down at the cat. "Unexpected help." They stayed until the morning grew warmer, Margaret talking softly about her life, the garden, the new book club she had joined at Ellen's insistence. When she finally rose to leave, she felt lighter somehow, as if something long carried had been gently lifted from her shoulders. That evening, sitting on her porch swing with Chance curled in her lap, Margaret watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in years, she felt truly present, not lost in memories or numb with grief. "Thank you," she whispered to Chance, stroking his fur. "For finding me." The cat looked up at her with those amber eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, and Margaret felt something settle in her soul, a recognition perhaps, or an acceptance. Whether Chance was truly Daniel returned to her in some miraculous way, or simply a stray cat who had needed her as much as she needed him, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that love, once thought lost, had found its way back into her life. The porch swing creaked gently as she rocked, the sound mingling with Chance's purring and the distant calls of birds settling for the night. A perfect moment of peace, wrapped in the growing certainty that while grief may change shape, love never truly leaves us. Margaret smiled and continued rocking, her heart no longer quite so lonely as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each one a reminder that even in the deepest night, light finds a way to shine through.